Hi everyone, my name's Holly Mathieson and I was going to be conducting Cosi tutte for English touring opera this year, but COVID-19 has put paid to our plans. We are very, very lucky that ETO has supported us financially and we're so incredibly grateful that they have. It means that we can put our brains together and come up with as much content as we can in this period for the people who would have been in our audiences. So today I've asked Sky Ingram and Stephan to chat to me about tempo in Cosi tutte, which sounds like a really nebulous thing to talk about, but actually I have two specific questions for them. But first of all, why don't you both introduce yourselves? Sky, maybe start with you.
I am Sky Ingram. I'm an Australian soprano based in London. This was my third contract with English Touring Opera, and it was my debut as Fiordaligi in Cosi tutte.
And I'm Stephan. I'm a German baritone. I have lived in London for a very, very long time. And I was going to sing Don Alfonso in this production of Cosi tutte. And luckily got to do a few performances like all of us. But then, as Holly said, unfortunately, we had to stop.
So my question for you two, well, it's not really a question so much as just a topic to bring up, is how between me, the conductor, and the orchestra with me in the pit, and you guys when you're on stage, how do we find those moments, because I think it's different for both of you, to know what tempo we're about to proceed in? The reason being, I have this kind of theory that Fiordaligi, always the tempo is connected very strongly to her temperament, her character, the mood she's in, who she's yelling at on stage. You know, she's so fiery and emotional, and always she builds us into the tempo through the preceding recit or something like that. Whereas Don Alfonso is the complete opposite. He's so, to me, so objective and calm, and he sings a very standard recit, and then he pauses and looks to the front and begins a sort of a recitation, if you know what I mean, as a little mini aria, which is, it's not that they don't have emotion or character to them, it's that it's cerebral rather than emotional or something like that. Does that make sense? Stephan, do you want to start with you? Is that the feeling you have when you set up those arias that you sing?
Yeah, I think what's difficult about them is exactly as you say, that he doesn't show a lot of emotion. He doesn't get to sing a lot of things in the whole opera where he gets to show himself. I mean, he's so busy manipulating everyone else, and as you say, try and stay objective and on the outside of things, that emotionally he is very kind of not involved, unlike all the other characters, especially someone like Fiordaligi. But of course he's in charge as well. So there is, on the other side of that, is a thing that when I come to a point like this where you go from the scene with Dorabella and Fiordaligi, where he then says, such a disaster, and launches into that little mini aria, is that it should feel very much like he is in charge of what's going on, including the tempo. But of course it has to be a two-way thing. And yeah, and of course it's different every night. That's the other thing, that as much as you talk about what tempo you want, depending on where you come from, and you know, if the chair is a little bit to the left or to the right, and lots of physical things on the stage will make a difference if you really catch the tempo exactly as you want, or if you maybe don't, and then you need the conductor to kind of basically catch that and make sure that we are still kind of ending up at the right tempo, even if I maybe messed up the first 2 or 3 bars. So that will be different every night. So it is very much a two-way conversation, and finding the tempo is always, I think, a two-way thing, even if it should look like I'm in charge at that point. Yeah. If that makes sense.
And it also depends on how well we can all hear each other in different venues. So For the
Yeah.
orchestra, for instance, half of them might go on muscle memory of what they're used to the engine being. But say if, yes, as you say, remember the first "Women's Honor is," you know, that you sing at the beginning, and we
Yes.
had this device where we needed a way for you to be in control of it visually, and so we had you picking, sort of fussing with the chair on stage or something. So it was like, I'm choosing to sing right now, as opposed to the orchestra starting you, because that's worked with your character. But of course, if any of that, just for really pragmatic reasons, was different for practical reasons, the orchestra, of course, don't see that and don't know that and don't have that warning, other than a look of terror in my eyes. um, and so, especially in back desks, who always feel a little more disconnected, the likelihood is that some of them will go off on muscle memory. Others will have picked up the signals from you or me, and so we have that little moment of two train tracks at once, and it just takes a while to get onto one. Whereas you, Sky, often within arias, you have some very definite changes. You have a lot of tempo changes within the material you sing, but leading into them, often the recit, often an accompanied recit, a really fiery, temperamental one, sets us up in some way. Do you think about that as you're doing those accompanied recits, about kind of getting yourself up to altitude in preparation for the aria?
Probably for a lot of Mozart recitative, but especially as Fiordiligi in this opera. I mean, in general, she goes through such an emotional journey, and in one day, it's crazy to get your head around dramatically. But her recitatives are some of the most exciting music she sings, and where the recit starts and where it ends, you can end it starting in the tempo of an aria, or depending on musical preference or dramatic preference, you might be shouting to the skies, or your heart might be really aching, and you might need to just suspend time for a moment before falling into a tempo. It all depends, and that's the exciting thing from rehearsals, is that you get to find those moments, find what works, and try different things. It is really different, the recit, from the tempo that is found. And because we were double cast, of course, we did it differently. And you were very, very kind to let us bring our tempos that best suited our instruments, which surely is the best way to go about it. But it meant your job was twice as hard, and I thank you so much for that, because it meant I could deliver it the best version I could. But the recitatives are so much fun in Mozart, these Mozart arias, because they're wild. They are absolutely full of emotional outbursts. All the information of the aria is in the recitative, and I feel like the aria, probably most of the time in most arias, but in my two, really is a reflection upon the recitative. And there's often a point near the end where there is a very big tempo change, where it gets a bit faster, a bit more feisty. And again, between the two of us Fiordiligis as double cast sopranos, we needed different tempos, and it's because it matched our instrument, we were able to still deliver the right amount of energy, and whether it's excitedness or passion that is needed, it was still, the result was still the desirable result, just matching our own bodies and our own voices. So I love the recitatives. And there's moments as well where, because it's accompanied recit as opposed to a strict tempo, there is a bit of freedom. There are, discussed and arranged freedom between you, the conductor, and the orchestra, that us singers get to have a moment of, do I hold another millisecond longer on the high note because I've got it today, or a bit of a frog in my throat, and then end it a little early and then drive in really hard on the next note. That's the beauty of live theatre, that you don't get on recordings that are perfectly edited, is that you don't know what you're going to get, but you are going to get a raw live delivery of that piece in that moment that you can't get again. It's just that moment. So I love the recitatives. They're almost the most fun bit, really.
I think you just coined the classical music industry's new great branding slogan, raw live. There we go. Opera still is alive.
You heard it first here.
But it's so true. And I think also when you've got the orchestra in the pit, and it was interesting talking to audience members who were not used to hearing a period instrument band for this. They were used to that very clean, silvery singing sound of modern instruments, because that's what most of the recordings are. And then you hear it with these wonderful sort of fuzzy, mossy, wood-grained kind of sounds coming out of the pit, a lot of which actually determined some of the tempi. So there were a lot of things where vocally it would have felt better somewhere, or we're used to it being somewhere slightly different from modern instruments, but there's just a certain tempo that suits wind instruments or string instruments of that period. So that was interesting to me. But also talking about what you were just saying about you and the double casting of Fiordiligi and how different it was for you and Joe. And yeah, in a couple of spots there were really different tempi for the coloratura, but at no point did I feel this feels like the slow version. And I think it's exactly that. As long as it was the tempo that had maximum vibrancy in the voice, then it felt alive somehow. So it's a really interesting thing about, well, what is tempo? But that was really a big lesson for me, actually. It was really interesting.
It was really nice to have the flexibility to do that for us, actually, because we're such different voices with different techniques, but still are the right type of voice for the role. It was great to be able to do the best version that we could do without feeling trapped in each other's, oh, I prefer that tempo, and then feeling like we're wearing the wrong pair of shoes or something. It was wonderful. And there, of course, there were many moments where ensemble we all have to agree on the same one, but when we have those solo moments, that was a wonderful freedom, which sometimes you get with companies and conductors and sometimes you don't, and you learn that's also very valuable, to be flexible and learn from that as well. Yeah, had a great time. The one show I got to do, it was great.
It was a banger.
And my dress rehearsal was wonderful too.
Stephan, here's a question for you. You were doing the Bach as well, the St. John Passion. Do you, and this was your first time singing Don Alfonso, is that right?
Yeah.
So do you have a different sense of tempo between those two styles or those two pieces? Because Don Alfonso, often the material he sings once he sings a little aria is quite driven, isn't it? Not always, but often, in a way that I don't associate with Bach.
I think what you said earlier, I mean, for me personally, I think it has to do with emotion, in the sense that in the John Passion, because I'm emotionally really involved as myself, I don't feel I think about tempo as an abstract so much, because it really seems to come from what at that moment happens musically and what I get back and what comes out of me. So there's a, hopefully, in an ideal world, there's a kind of logic, an emotional logic to that I think means that tempo is something that happens and comes out of the music. And with Don Alfonso, I do feel, I think the trick, I mean, I loved, as you said, it was the first time that I got to sing that role, and I absolutely loved it. But I think what is difficult about it is that maybe apart from the trio, which is probably the only moment where he gets to almost get caught up in the poetry and the beauty of that moment. I mean, he, of course, even in that he is pretending, but I think that's probably for me was also the one moment in the whole piece where I felt he really almost melted, and he almost kind of got caught up in that moment. But apart from that, everything he does and says and sings is in reaction to other people, and to put the story kind of to make the story move along and win the bet, so to speak. And I find that probably the most difficult thing, that there is so little emotion in it, that almost everything I do or say and sing is objective, as you say, and is so cold in a way that it is fun, but I hardly ever feel that I get to express myself, if that makes sense, in the way that I do in the John Passion. Does that? And I think that's why tempo is very different. I mean, I think I feel that Dolo Alfonso is probably a lot faster, even though it isn't all fast tempi, but it is because there is so little where he gets to reflect emotionally on anything. He just kind of moves through the whole piece and is just anxious to observe the other people. But I think that's what makes the role real fun, but also very difficult. I think if you're someone, I guess it depends what kind of singer or person you are, but I mean, I know that I find singing a lot easier if I have an emotional reason to express myself, and if that's taken away somehow, it's a lot harder. Also, just to find the energy to kind of keep it going, if that makes sense. And that's why I think the trio was such a beautiful moment for me, because it's the one moment in the piece, even though it's very scary for many reasons vocally, but it's the one moment where I felt I could just let go of trying to be in control, if that makes sense, and let something else take over. And all the other times, it takes a lot of energy for him, I think, to constantly react to other people, but immediately try and move things on in a way that is very calculated, very manipulative.
Two things occurred to me as we were discussing it. The first is the English translation and how that affects your tempo as well. And there's probably not a huge amount to say on that, but I remember, Stephan, a lot of your material is very wordy. It's like patter song. And of course, you're German. I mean, your English is better than most native English speakers. But still, I remember in rehearsal, there was the odd vowel that was,
of course,
our strange diphthongs and stuff that we do in English. Did that get in the way for either of you, the English translation? Because it is a hard language to sing in terms of the flow of the line in some way.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. One of the harder things about doing a translation that's not the original is the vowels. Originally, certain vowels that suit certain heights of notes are written to match that word specifically, and you can't always find a matching word that sits in the right part of the sentence in the language, the second choice language you're singing in. So yes, but I had a lot less trouble than I thought I would. I thought, English, not singing Italian opera in English. And then I started working on it, and you know, he thought about it a lot, and it was fairly kind to my role, at least. There are some moments where you have to work a lot harder to spit sounds out, and there are some moments where you just think, there's 6 of us singing, the lower parts can handle that. I'm just going to go, you really do think of
a soprano wallowing to be done at times.
There's a couple of points where you just got to do it. I mean, we're singing so far above our speaking register. It's just, you get this unofficial license.
Sky, it wasn't your first Fiordalicio. Have you ever sung it in Italian?
I've never performed the full role before in Italian. No, I've studied and performed lots of excerpts of it. But no, my first time doing it was in English.
Okay, because I also, it was my first time doing the role, and I guess that made it easier in the sense that I had no Italian baggage. I mean, in the sense, I think had I sung the role in Italian before, I probably would have found it a lot harder to get that out of my head, but there was nothing in my head to get out of. I think that would made it a lot easier. Of course, because especially Alfonso, has so much recit, like Despina does. And some of it rolls off the tongue easier than others, and other words. And you are totally right, Holly. There are things that really needed, where I needed to work very hard to get it right, and other things just make a lot more sense. But I think, even though it is my second language, I by now feel at home in it, and I get an immediate reaction. I mean, as in my brain, if I say those words, responds to it in a way that it wouldn't if I would do it in Italian. And even though the Italian is, of course, the original language, and might I mean, I remember other people like Tom and Freddie who had done the roles before in Italian saying that certain bits felt really awkward because they had the Italian in their heads, and probably Italian is more idiomatic to the recit line, but I still probably would have found it harder to sing it in Italian because of not having that immediate brain feedback to the words.
And especially for you, when he is so cerebral as a character, each little syllable is dripping with meaning and humor or spite or all these, it's not just a general emotion that he's expressing, they're very specific.
I have to say, I think the single most important thing in my head was the what Laura had come with Kafafi, having that backdrop of him being a poet, and then reading a bit of Kafafi's poetry. I think that really made it easier for me to see that there was a human being behind him, not just an evil puppet master. I think I'd just be interested from a conductor's point of view. It must be really difficult because of course we know that things will be a little bit different every within each performance, and you know that as well. But you're the only person who basically has the orchestra who can't see us, and you have us on on an upper level, and you are kind of the person who has to kind of constantly try and kind of mitigate between that, the fact that the orchestra can't see what's going on stage. And I think so often those little differences are not actually due to something very deep or meaningful. That's because something on stage fell, or something in the chair was in half a meter to the left. So those little things make a huge difference, and you react to it, and suddenly for a bar and a half you lose a bit of energy and the tempo drops. There are all sorts of things that happen for very profane reasons, and you are always the person basically who has to react to that. Is that something that I don't know, you find very easy, or you find that it takes a lot of experience and it's different with different orchestras?
It's definitely different with different orchestras. It depends how proactive and how good at listening they are, how reactive they are. And with us, with the Old Street Band, also it was a very small orchestra, so the kind of Chinese whispers of getting people's attention was very quick, because we were only sitting 3 desks deep in the strings. But if I can see that something, say, there's just for the audience's benefit, there's one recit, one of Fiordaligi's recits, where she has to put on soldier's clothing, and there was a belt buckle and there was a knife that kept falling out, and yet every night something goofy happened with it. And
did you see my opening night though, where the knife landed stubby bit first in the ground, and I thought for a split second I broke character and I went, nice one. That was hilarious. Sorry,
you're gonna have a prop. If you're gonna have a prop malfunction, that's a pretty impressive one. So in those moments, if I can see that happening and know, okay, we've got about 1.8 seconds for this to resolve itself before where the orchestra is expecting something to come in, I'll just hold a finger up so they all know, look out, something weird is happening. Which is dangerous, because it could also mean I've changed my mind, I'm conducting this in one. But I think the look of panic on the face probably speaks volumes. It's sort of like, whoa, everyone look out, something's weird. And also if we were in, say, one of the big ensemble, the sextets and quintets and things, where often the 2 women would have one type of texture, the 2 male lovers would have a different type of texture, because often they're sort of doing little asides to themselves about the joke that's going on, and you two are quite earnest. And then at the back of the stage, Don Alfonso and Despina are trying hard not to burst, wet their pants laughing or something like that. So there's 3 different musical textures and a kind of a yup, up, 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 kind of chuggy texture going on somewhere in the orchestra. Those moments, every now and then, especially first time in the new venue where we were all adjusting acoustically, you could feel these different strands of the knitting kind of come apart from each other. And in those moments also, I would do a kind of everyone just bring your attention back. Don't stay on autopilot down in the pit, because something weird is happening up there that I need to decide who to anchor with. And in those moments, it's very much, for me at the moment, instinct, often which is wrong. You just take a punt. You take a guess with the information you have. Who has the running quavers and therefore is less likely to be able to move? Who is got some rests in the next bar so they'll be able to hear what everyone else is doing and adjust? So you kind of think along those lines. And the same with the orchestra. If your violas and cellos are solid, everyone else kind of snaps to them in a way. So often there are a few moments where it seemed to work best for the ensemble on stage to just connect with either you, Stephan, or Freddie, the other bass voice on stage, or baritone, and lock the orchestra with that lowest voice, because that was going to be most audible as a kind of a foundation for the other singers to then snap to that grid. But there are moments where you just have to take a punt and hope for the best, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I remember doing a guitar concerto once, and with a really young player. He started playing, and it's a long introduction, well, a few bars, but he just went off-piste. And he was just, his eyes were getting bigger and bigger, and he was looking at me like, I don't know what I'm doing. And he just played for about a minute and a half by himself. It kind of the correct type of material. It did sound legit. It just was this weird thing. And then at one point, you just heard him snap back to the correct key and do something that sounded like a cadence, and the entire orchestra just knew, right, we're back in the right, and they just went off with the it was amazing. I didn't control any of it. It was just all of us had extra kind of antenna out going.
Can I ask you a question, Holly?
Yeah, of course.
Is there a technique or a trick that you have, or that perhaps secretly all conductors have, I've no idea, of how do you remember a tempo? Is it something you remember in your muscle memory, and you just because especially if you've done a piece several times, there's only one way that I sing an aria that sounds the best generally. So I've got one set of muscle memory to remember, whereas if you're doing different tempi with different companies and different singers, is there a trick? Do you think of a clock ticking and then halve it and find the right mathematical time from there? Like, is there or does your dance training and the fact that you conduct a lot of ballet and have a lot of rhythm to deal with, and watching movement, is that helpful? I don't know how you do it, and I'm just amazed. So do you have a trick, or is there something you learn at college or something?
I think it's different for different brains, and I'm so relieved that you like how I do it, because it's the source of greatest anxiety to me, because I've had so many times with orchestras when they've said quite rudely, why are you doing this so slowly, and so I get paranoid always that I'm too slow. So it's something that sits at the back of my mind and I get quite concerned about. But for me, it's a mixture. So there are a couple of really dorky tricks. Obviously, thinking of a second hand going around on the clock gives you crotch at 60 immediately. And then if you think halfway between that, it gives you 120. The other one, which is really useful and comes up a lot when you're doing sort of, as a conductor, light music concerts or kids concerts and things like that, you find a lot of things at around about crotch at 100, which means 100 pulses to the minute for the audience. And that is the exact same tempo as the Bee Gees' Staying Alive. So often, if you've had that kind of loads of
pop music saves the day.
Yeah, totally. Disco saves the day, more specifically.
Isn't that also CPR?
It is.
Staying alive, staying alive.
So often, if I'm doing a piece where I know we're about to, the next number is at crotch at 100 or something that I can judge from that, like 50 or 150 or 120 or something, I'll be sitting there looking very serious, waiting for the spoken introduction to finish. And in my head, I will be doing disco to get 120 in my head.
Yes.
Yeah. But yes,
I'm going to think differently next time we work together. Now I'm going to look down at you and I'll be like, she's BGing right now, isn't she?
Yeah, totally. But with you guys, often there's a specific phrase from your aria or your duet that locks the tempo for me, that I know if I keep that word and the way you sing it and the way your consonants do it in my head. So often I'll write that at the beginning of the number or at the end of the previous recit. So I've got in my head that little nugget of very clear tempo. It doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. But yeah, with ballet, often it's thinking about the movements myself and knowing how long it takes to do that or understanding what's going on. But of course, you never get it 100% right. And also we get, it's less so in opera, I think, but in concert work, a different acoustic, a different venue, you have to change the tempo. There's no way you could play The Rite of Spring at the same tempo in Royal Festival Hall as you could in a cathedral, say for the Three Choirs Festival.
Yeah.
It has to be a completely different tempo. But like we were saying for you and Joe and sharing the role, it's about the energy being right, not the actual beats and time that keeps it alive.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for tuning in and having a listen to these two gurus sharing their brains and experience with us. And a huge thank you to ETO for supporting your artists and your staff and your tech crew and everyone that contributes to these productions. We really appreciate it so much, and that it means that we can keep making content and being creative during this period, and getting content out to our audiences is just the best thing in the world. So thank you, ETO. And hopefully we'll see you all next season. Cheers.